So you've now subscribed to the Adobe Photography Plan, otherwise known as the Adobe Tax. You've got Photoshop, you've got Lightroom, and you're wondering, well, which one do I use for which situation? So we're going to figure that out right now. Here are what I think are the key differences between Lightroom and Photoshop. Lightroom works on a non-destructive editing basis, meaning you're not actually going to save out a file with the changes you've made. You're only going to a source file and working on a copy of it, essentially. Whereas in Photoshop, if you open an image and do changes on it, you can do nothing else with it but save it to itself or to another file name. So in that sense, it's destructive because you're working on the original file. Let's assume that you have a bunch of images that were shot pretty well at the same time in the same kind of light, but they're all a little dark. In Lightroom, you can take one of those images and do your exposure adjustment or whatever, and then you can do a really easy synchronization of that change across all the images that you want to adjust with that same exposure adjustment. Photoshop's strength lies in the fact that it allows powerful compositing with layers, which Lightroom does not do. And I'll put a card at the top of the screen here so you can get a link to a Photoshop tutorial that I did on compositing. One of the things I like about Lightroom is its efficient keywording and captioning capabilities. So if you've ever done stock photography, you know that anything that goes on the internet and you want to have found has to have keywords and a decent caption in order for people to find your image. Photoshop, not so great for that, but there may be some capabilities in Bridge to allow you to do that, but not directly in Photoshop itself. So once you've done that keywording and captioning within Lightroom, it has a function whereby you can then effectively search for any image that has a particular keyword in it, and that's not such an easy thing to do within Photoshop, although there may be some capability for that in Bridge, although I've never tried that myself. Now, one downside of Lightroom is you can't, to my knowledge, do title overs on top of an image, whereas that's a piece of cake in Photoshop because Photoshop allows you to work with layers, and a title is basically just put on a separate layer. Okay, what's next? Okay, let's take a look at how Lightroom basically works. On your hard drive, you have source files. Source files are your images. And also on that same hard drive, you're storing what's called a catalog, which is basically a database. And you can create as many different catalogs as you would like in order to separate out different types of images that you want to group together. So then what we're doing is actually opening within Lightroom's library module. When you import, you're actually just bringing a virtual image, and it can be a RAW, JPEG, DNG file, whatever format. And within the library module, you can do things like keywording, for instance. But then you might want to do some image editing in terms of white balance. It might be exposure or whatever. So you go into the develop module and do your edits. And keep in mind that, again, this is a virtual image. Basically, Lightroom is just opening a copy of the source file. It's not going to touch your source file. And as you work, it's going to do some automatic saving, so you don't have to keep going up and clicking save if you're worried that your computer is going to crash in the middle of your edit session or whatever. And then what happens is you record to this database where your source file is and what edits you did to that file. And that's all it's doing, is it's not actually making a copy of the source file. So the information that it stores is very small, because it's just telling Lightroom next time you open it up and want to go to that photograph that you've now edited, where that source file is on your hard drive, brings in a virtual copy again and applies all the edits that you did and the keywording and all that sort of stuff to that image while it's open in Lightroom, but it's not actually destructively editing your source file. So let's say we've done some adjustments to an image in Lightroom. And if you look down here on the film strip, see I've got one highlighted for this airplane, and we've done all our adjustments. Now, you don't have to do this, but let's just right click on it and create something called a virtual copy. And now you notice that it's created two copies, or it's created a copy, I should say, of our original. So if we click on the copy, because we don't want to disturb the original, again, everything's virtual, so you're not going to destroy the file, the source file that's on your hard drive. If we wanted to now do something like put a title on this thing, if we go up to Photo, Edit In, there's two ways you can do this. One is you can edit in Photoshop 2020 or Photoshop, whatever version you've got, and but from there you're going to save it as a file that will be saved onto your hard drive at some point. But if you wanted to bring that image back into Lightroom afterwards, you could click on Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. So let's try that. And it's opening up Photoshop now automatically. So there's our image brought into Photoshop. And what I'm going to do now is add a title to this. This will be my compositing effort. So let's click in here. And it comes up with a silly phrase. Let's just type over that. And so there's what we want to now bring back into Lightroom. So let's say close. And we'll commit because we created a layer, and then we'll save changes. If we go back into Lightroom now, there it is, number 3. I was on the wrong one, but there it is. So it's actually created, it's brought in, I should say, and created another virtual copy of this file, except it now has what we did in Photoshop superimposed over top of it. So this is simple. This is just using titling, but we could certainly have composited a number of other images over top of this airplane and then brought it back into Lightroom. And now we could continue doing any adjustments we liked within Lightroom itself. So if you're just interested in doing some basic exposure, white balance, contrast, highlight adjustments, that sort of thing, let's have a look at how similar Adobe Camera Raw's basic controls are to Lightroom's developed controls. And here we're just looking at Adobe Camera Raw with a file open on the left and Lightroom on the right in its develop module. So this is just to show you how similar the basic adjustments for things like exposure, contrast, highlights, and so on are between the two programs. Again, on the left, you're seeing a raw file that's being opened in Photoshop. So that's why it's opened Adobe Camera Raw. You can see everything looks very similar, including the histogram at the top of each of the screens. Well, this wasn't intended to be a complete tutorial on Lightroom, but just to give you an idea of how Photoshop and Lightroom coexist in that Adobe Photography Plan. So if you got something out of this, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you will. We're kind of low on subscribe count. And hit that notification bell if you want to see more. Thanks.